Hello, everybody. This is Graham Plaster with America's Future Series, and I'm the co-host for the Joint Military Pitch Day. Right now, I am pleased to have Morten Brøgger. Did I pronounce that right?
That is definitely good enough.
Good. Morten is the CEO of Wire, which is a strategic partner for our event. They're the platform we're using for all of our hospitality suites for all the pitch companies. So hopefully you get to check out their cool technology. Morten is an award-winning enterprise-grade end-to-end encryption collaboration platform. So Wire is an award-winning enterprise-grade end-to-end encryption collaboration platform. And Morten has over 20 years experience in the tech industry, as well as extensive go-to-market and SaaS experience, spanning both the US and the European markets. But most recently, Morten was the CEO at Huddle, a content collaboration platform serving large professional services firms, as well as the UK and the US governments. So he's got a really cool background, and it's of the moment. They already have a DoD client that's relevant for everybody at the event. So we're going to talk through a little bit about what Wire does. And before we jump into that, Morten, anything you want to add to your bio that I missed?
No, I spent the last 20 years of my life in communication, right? And that has been upgraded, and now I'm in a very secure communication, very secure collaboration. So I think I followed the trend in the world in the last 20 years. So I think that's pretty good from an introduction of myself. Okay. Lived in many countries. I'm originally from Denmark. I lived a couple of years in Switzerland, 9 years in Luxembourg, and now I'm on my 6 years in the US. So I do consider myself as a citizen of the planet, and enjoy working with all kinds of people, because you learn good stuff every day.
Yeah. All right. So before we dive into other questions, tell us kind of in a few words an overview of Wire.
Yeah, I can do that. I'm not sure I can do it in a few words, but I'll do my best, Graham, right? But Wire fundamentally is probably the most secure collaboration platform for work out there, right? We are an open source technology, which is very important when it comes to security. I'll get back to that. We are third party audited. So like our software is audited by a neutral third party. We'll get back to why that's super important these days. But when I say collaboration platform, it means like you can chat with text, you can send files, you can have a phone call, you can have a video conference, you can share a screen on the conference call. And you and I is currently on a video conference on Wire, just to give you an impression of that. And in Wire, everything is end-to-end encrypted, true end-to-end encrypted. Not just like old school encryption, but true end-to-end encryption. I'll give you a few words of that a little bit. We today primarily serve government customers and large enterprise customers. And we do that because that is absolutely where we have seen the initial demand for a much more secure communication and collaboration to protect the different pieces of information and data that you're collaborating around. And in a world where we can fundamentally not open the newspaper or turn on the TV without hearing something about cybersecurity or cyber breaches or ransomware. So this is becoming super, super important, right? But before we start, Graham, maybe it's worthwhile for me to explain a little bit about why is Wire different than the Skypes, the WebEx, the Slacks, the Zooms, and the Microsoft Teams of the world, right? Because I think it's important to understand that in a few words, right?
Yeah.
And the best way for me to explain that is, very traditional enterprise SaaS and communication solutions is. Users are connected with the devices over the internet, and in the cloud, you will have all the logic of the application. You will do all the processing of the application. You will store all the data of the application, and you will manage security. And if the application does encryption, normally they will manage the encryption keys in the cloud, who then encrypt during transit and sometimes at rest on the devices. And the intrinsic security weakness of that solution is what we call man in the middle. Because technically, that cloud provider has access to the encryption keys, which means that they can read all your content, they can listen into all your conversation, back in time and in the present, right? And this is actually why a lot of large governments and large enterprises, for that matter, still prefer to have their communication collaboration structure on premise, because then you don't have that man in the middle vulnerability, or at least it's limited to your own employees and they most often trust their own employees more than they trust other employees. I'm not sure that's always true because we never know who the bad guy is, but that is the reason why. Now, Wire is a bit different. Let me try and explain. In Wire, the users are connected from the devices over the internet to the servers. And I use the word servers because in Wire, you as a customer can choose to deploy that from our SaaS, like super easy, just set up the account. Or you can actually deploy it on your own servers on premise and on your own network if you prefer that as a customer. And particularly a lot of governments, specifically if they're a non-civilian agency, actually very often prefer to have their own servers. Now, in Wire, the architecture is very different than traditional SaaS architecture. It's really like a distributed cloud. And so it's like the architecture of the future is what I claim. This means that on the servers, there's actually just a little bit of the logic. The majority of the logic resides in the application on your device. There's only a little bit of processing. Actually, the majority of the processing happens in the application on your device. There's some storage on the server, mainly larger files. Otherwise, your mobile devices get filled up very quickly. But when it comes to security, in Wire, the encryption keys are distributed to the devices of our users. So they only exist on the device of the users. And by architecture, I cannot access your keys, your encryption keys under any circumstances. It's simply, by architecture, virtually impossible. And Graham, here is the open source that comes in, because you actually don't have to trust me or my slides or my website. You can actually go on GitHub and check my software that it works the way we claim it does. That's why open source equals transparency, which is becoming a very important foundation of security going forward, right? And we have had DoD customers who had actually checked our software before we actually got to meet them. So we were approved from a security point of view before we had the first meeting. So this is just proving my point. Further in Wire, every time you send or receive a message, the encryption keys update. And here, basically, a message needs to be understood in a broad context. Text message, file share, phone call, video conference, ephemeral message, screen share, whatever transaction do. After each transaction, the encryption key updates. So we're segmenting the data into the smallest logic payloads, namely each message, and giving it its own unique encryption key. Not like the old school has one key doing everything, right? So this fundamentally brings the level of security to a whole new level, right? And this is, again, when we speak to our colleagues within the DoD, they say this is the highest level of quantum resistancy they've seen in any commercial enterprise communication and collaboration. And let's just say this is something that you need to think about already now, because what you communicate today is still secret or some of it is still secret in 2 or 3 or 4 years when you have the quantum computer. So you need to start protecting that differently already today. Does this make sense to you, Graham?
Yeah, I think you've already touched on the next question that we were going to dive into, which is why are secure collaboration platforms really important right now? And what's changed, obviously, in light of COVID and in light of cybersecurity threats?
Yeah, well, let's take COVID first. The future just arrived overnight. Never have we seen the future arrive to this place so fast. We actually, before COVID, we spoke about the future work, that more and more people were working from home. Already before COVID, more than 50% of all employees were working at least one time every week outside the company firewall. And now we literally all do it on a very, very regular, if not daily or hourly basis, right? So the future arrived. So when you work outside the company's firewall, how do you actually protect the data while making a good user experience as well? And that's where security is coming in. And let's just take some of the statistics outside. There's plenty of statistics trying to size how big is the cybercrime problem really. And some of the research is out there. It's a $6 trillion yearly problem. $6 trillion. That's literally 3% of our global GDP. That's a massive problem. And, that's what this world spends on building perimeter protection for your networks, operating preventive measures to avoid, fighting attacks when they happen, repairing damages as they happen and after they happen, and actual damages and losses after such an attack, whether it's ransomware or denial of service or whatever the attack is. So this is a massive problem. And it's clear that the world needs to start dealing with that in a different way. And this is like secure collaboration is on such a rapid rise right now as a whole new category. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pull on the thread a little bit, COVID has put a lot of pressure on organizations to work in a decentralized way, and how does that play into the new complexities of what we're dealing with?
Well, it plays in from a security point of view, because you cannot do a traditional perimeter security like you traditionally do, because you're often outside the firewall, or you need to make sure that you can actually work outside the firewall while still having a good user ability. So you need to protect the communication and the content in a completely different way, and that's why we have gained such a high level of interest. And honestly, we've been a very fortunate company who has benefited from the COVID crisis. I feel almost embarrassed to say so, but it is true. But we were there, and we could help companies protect their communication according to what is required in the future. Not just from a cybersecurity, but actually also from like a privacy regulation point of view. Because if we are communicating data that has a privacy character, we are obligated many places, like in Europe with GDPR, in California with the California Consumer Privacy Act. And clearly the way we protect and encrypt each different message uniquely with its own encryption key, we are default in compliance as a tool with these privacy regulations. Add to that the whole security aspect, and you start seeing why a lot of customers are using our platform.
Yeah, so that the dynamic between transparency and privacy and security, so you already kind of hinted at it, but what are the major security and privacy issues with collaboration platforms that organizations should be aware of?
I think we talked about it a little bit, right? And clearly, as the workforce become more and more mobile, right? It is really from a security point of view to ensure that the integrity of the organization data outside the four walls of the physical offices or the logic firewalls of the IT infrastructure, that these digital assets, which are the lifeblood of an organization, that these are protected in a good way. Because without them, we can't really function, right? And these are also what is fundamentally the target of any cyber attacks, right? So how do we protect that in a good way? And again, I think that's from the IT security angle, which is the most important one for the organization. And second, it's also like, how do we comply with increased privacy going forward?
It's interesting. When I've gone house shopping, sometimes you'll see somebody who say, this is built in a period of time when they overbuilt everything, when it was, they just didn't know what the actual engineering requirements were. Therefore, they put a lot more wood and steel into things. And nowadays we can get away with building it a lot, with a lot less. And, right now it feels pretty good to go into something that has strong bones to it in a house.
Yeah.
And we're still, I think, trying to figure out when it comes to cybersecurity, what's better, to have something that meets the minimal requirement for cloud, cloud architecture, or whether we want to beef it up and have the absolute best in security we can have for everything, even if it slows us down with bandwidth. And of course, I know you guys are grappling with that balance also, with trying to figure out how to do all the functions that other platforms do, but also have the high level of security, right?
Yeah. And you're right. This way of doing true end-to-end encryption, where the keys are distributed to the devices and where they are rotating, so like one message has one key, clearly adds complexity into the application. So doing that and still having great usability is hard work and an art, right? Because it's really a distributed architecture. So I think we've been working on it for many years. We have a past where we were focused on the consumer market. So I think if you can use WhatsApp, you can figure out how to use Wire. That was one of the things. We have just launched a greater capacity on video conferencing, because the COVID crisis fundamentally told us that 4 people on a video conference was not enough. So we're now up at 12, and it sounds like not a lot, but 12 people on a simultaneous video conference that is truly end-to-end encrypted is actually quite a bit achievement. We were some of the first in the world, we were the first in the world to launch this. And that will increase more and more going forward. And by the way, we did a lot of research, and fundamentally, I think it was 89% in the research of all the respondents saying if you cannot really have a video conference with more than 10 people, then it's not productive. Then it's really like what we call like a preacher meeting, one-to-many call line.
Yeah.
So we now.
True. Yeah.
So
I
we
just
now.
spoke to. Go ahead.
No. Please go ahead.
I just spoke to one of my kids' online classes this morning, and it seems to be pretty difficult to manage a large group of any age. Honestly, tech savvy people are not. But once you get past that 12 number, it's pretty hard.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think that's what we work with now. And I think another thing that you need to continually talk about that in the future, you're just tacking on security after the fact is the wrong way to do it, because you cannot just it's not like you have a flat tire and you put a patch on it. That's the wrong way to deal with cybersecurity, right? It really has to be done from a security first infrastructure. And that's why platforms like Wire, the end-to-end encryption is literally the foundation on which you build the house. It cannot be an annex. It's not how end-to-end encryption works. It has to be the foundation, and you have to trust that everything in that house is truly end-to-end encrypted and protected by its own, its own individual shield, whatever is in that house and whatever you do in that house. So these are some of the things that we've been working with right now. And at the same time, you see some of the traditional competition just getting to the best practices of what we call old school end-to-end encryption as well.
In the old days of Facebook, they had kind of a slogan, run fast and break things. Yeah. And it was a slogan that probably epitomizes a lot of the startup mentality among companies that are interested in, quickly building a product and shipping it, iterating around it. Lean startup methodology or some other methodologies, but in that process, of course, a lot of the people in national security are concerned, like, why aren't we starting with security at the beginning of the conversation? Why are we, as you said, why are we bolting it on after the fact? Because especially when you're talking about healthcare or critical infrastructure or national security issues, you can't build software with security being an after the fact consideration.
No, it would be like building airplane engines. Let's build fast and see if it fails. Yeah. Right. I'm not sure I'm going to get on these things if you can fly right, or airbags or seatbelts for your car. That's the wrong principles. We need to be able to trust this stuff, and we need to be able to trust the vendors who actually build this, and that they undergo some kind of transparency and certification. Because otherwise it's not really worth it, right? Security prevention is a lot about trust from the people that you lean on, and this is absolutely one of the core values in our company, right? That you need to be able to trust us, right? And we need to continue to drive this forward, right? And it's like it's a zero trust architecture where you don't really know who's on this. It's like truly end-to-end encrypted and everything. And the fact that it can be delivered on premise for some of these organizations that we talked about is super, super important, right? And in the world of COVID and all the conferencing, one thing that we took a great joy in reading is actually that the data protection officer of Berlin in Germany basically made a research, and they publicized a report where they analyzed all the conferencing solutions out there, including Zoom and Teams and Google and all that stuff, in terms of, are they actually complying with the GDPR regulation, the European data privacy regulation, right? And they were not. But Wire was one of the few solutions that actually did that. So clearly, that generated quite a lot of interest for our application among large enterprises in Germany as well. So this is becoming more and more important going forward. And all this data privacy thing that has going on so far has really been about legal tick boxes, not really architectural, changing the application to natively support data privacy. Which requires a high level of security, right?
What are the biggest challenges and trends that you're seeing emerging in the secure communication space?
It is, I think some of the biggest trends is really around, how do you bring this transparency into the picture, right? And how do you at the same time give the right level of solid user experience? How do you support mobility? Because this is to an increasing extent how we fundamentally work, and how do you make that part of your organization, right? A lot of the customer we work with, they have a whole different set of problems, right? They fight against what we call shadow IT solutions, where they don't really have a good collaboration tool. So people are using their consumer applications like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger to do work, because it's just how we communicate nowadays. But the problem is that fundamentally erodes the entire cybersecurity defense that the organization set up if you're using these shadow IT applications as well. So to a lot of extent, how do we work with that? How do we make sure that there's a strong level of security, data sovereignty, and how do we rebuild the trust into the technology today? Because I don't think every time we have a crisis like COVID, technology just takes a step forward in helping the world, right? But we need to rebuild trust into this one.
What is on the horizon for Wire?
To be even better at supporting the remote work and mobility, right? Hence, like the massive investment we did in re-architecturing our true end-to-end encrypted conferencing during the COVID crisis. We spoke about that, so we now can be more than 12 participants on the solution. We are currently participating very, very active within an industry body called the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF, on standardizing the next generation encryption protocol, MLS, which stands for Message Layer Security, which is going to bring higher level of security, better scalability, and even less what we call or more of the zero footprint architecture into the solution as well. So these are some of the things that we're working very, very hard to bring forward, and some of my colleagues in Wire is taking leading roles in that work.
That's exciting. Any final thoughts or parting comments?
No, these were good questions, Graham. Thank you so much. I'm happy to do this. I can see we are almost out of time, and I felt like we just started. But clearly, that's the passion for the project that we're on that you see shining through here.
Well, no, we're not almost out of time. We always have more time for more conversations, and as we proceed throughout this day, there will be many conversations that are pre-recorded like this one, and some that are live streamed. But many of our attendees will have the opportunity to check out Wire and see how it provides great value. And so I just want to encourage everyone to check out the hospitality suites for each of the pitch companies. Reach out to Wire if you have interest in directly collaborating with them. If you're with the government and you're scouting for new technology, reach out to Morten and his team and learn all about it. And with that, thank you again, Morten, for joining the call and being part of the event.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you.